Hi, I'm Emma. I'm the Director of Research at Spiro, and welcome to this new CXL course, Strategic Research for Experimentation. This course is going to be presented by myself, Emma Travis, and my colleague, Gertrude Vatra, who is an experimentation strategist at Spiro. Okay, so the journey of this course. This course is going to be comprised of 11 lessons, and we can split down those 11 lessons into three main sections. The first section is today's lesson, lesson number 1, which is an introduction to some of the fundamental principles and some of the fundamental frameworks that you will need to help you throughout the rest of the lessons. Section number 2 is comprised of lessons number 2 through to number 8. This is where we deep dive into some individual research methodologies. So things like usability studies, heat maps, analytics analysis, etc. Each of these lessons will dig deep into each of these methodologies in itself and talk about kind of the benefits, the pros and cons of each research method. And then the final 3 lessons will help you to take all of the insights and data from these different research methods and combine them to create a strategic roadmap for experimentation. This will include things like how to use thematic analysis, how to use goal tree maps, and how to present all of the insights and recommendations from all of these research activities. Welcome to lesson number 1, incorporating user research into your experimentation program. This lesson will cover off 3 main learning objectives. Firstly, we'll go back to basics and we'll think about what user research it actually is, and then why it matters when running high quality experimentation programs. Then we'll think about how to effectively incorporate user research into experimentation programs on an ongoing basis, and I'll share some frameworks to help you to do this. And then finally, I will talk about 3 different research objectives and 3 different types of research. Thinking of all research projects or methods in this framework can help us to incorporate user research more effectively into our experimentation programs. I'll also talk about the concept of a mixed methods approach to user research and how to use this approach to come up with an effective user research methodology for any use case or project. So, first of all, what user research is and why it matters when running high quality experimentation programs. Usability.gov defines user research as understanding user behaviors, needs, and motivations through observation techniques, tasks, and analysis, as well as other feedback methodologies. Now, if we kind of put our experimentation hats on and think about user research through the lens of an experimentation, the core definition of user research stays the same, but I would tag on a few more words, and we would say at the end that we are also using this data to inform hypotheses for experimentation. So anytime that we talk about user research in this lesson or in this course, this is ultimately what we're talking about. But why is user research even important or necessary as part of an experimentation program? Why can't we just put test ideas out the sky or test things that the CEO wants to test? This all comes down to the quality metrics when we think about an experimentation program, and ultimately the quality of the experimentation program that we're running. Running user research ultimately helps us to get closer to the truth by uncovering true barriers to conversion and the true reasons why users aren't converting on your site. So this means you can focus your experimentation efforts on addressing and solving those issues and opportunities, which increases the chance that you will have a high impact experimentation program. I want to draw your attention to one of Spiro's frameworks. So this is our program management metrics framework. So this details a wide range of different metrics that any business may want to use to help to measure the effectiveness of their experimentation program. As you can see on the slide, there's a range of different types of metrics, which include things like velocity, quality, efficiency, and so on. But what we're talking about today primarily is about quality. So ultimately, by running user research and informing your test ideas and experiments through the insights gained from user research, you will end up with a higher quality experimentation program. And that can be measured through things like test win rate, the percentage of conclusive tests, and ultimately the overall quality and impact of your experimentation program. I want to share an example of this in practice. As I mentioned, user research helps us get closer to the truth. What you're seeing on this video right now is the main navigation of an e-commerce website. They sell men's clothing. You can see within the navigation that there's quite a lot of options within the menu. And there was a hypothesis internally at this business that the amount of different options provided within the main navigation were causing what we call choice paralysis. So users couldn't find what they were looking for and they were overwhelmed with the amount of options. So what we could have done is we could have gone ahead and we could have designed a new main navigation for mobile aimed at reducing the amount of options within the menu. And we could have run that as an A/B test. However, what we did instead was we ran some focused user research aimed at validating this hypothesis before we went ahead and actually ran the experiment. So in this case, what that particularly looked like was observing session recordings in a tool called Content Square. We were able to view over 100 recordings and watch people interact with the main navigation menu. Out of those 100 recordings, we identified 4 people, so 4% ultimately, who seemed to experience some kind of difficulty or friction. And even in those cases, the friction that they experienced was quite minimal. So this drew us to the conclusion that actually, although this hypothesis had come from somebody who works internally at this company, from a user perspective, this wasn't an area of friction. It wasn't a barrier to conversion. So had we run an experiment around this topic, the likelihood is that we would have seen flat test results because we're not solving a real, genuine problem. So what we then did was we shifted our efforts to some of the issues that were identified as key barriers to conversion within user research. One of those being size and fit. So the difficulty of finding like a shirt and a suit that fits correctly when you're not able to try that on yourself. And we've run a wide range of experiments around that topic to help users to effectively find a product that fits them. And we see conclusive test results in those cases. So this example shows the importance of using user research to identify and therefore solve real customer problems. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about how to effectively incorporate user research into your experimentation program on an ongoing basis. So there are 3 different types of user research that should be conducted as part of any ongoing experimentation program. And this framework shows you those 3 different research objectives and different types. So firstly, we have explore or exploratory user research. The clue is in the name. This is about exploring, looking for new opportunities, identifying core customer problems, and generating new ideas. You may also hear this type of research being called generative user research. So the core objective of this type of research is simply to explore the user journey, explore the user experience, and identify areas of opportunity. Typical methods that are conducted for exploratory user research include things like customer surveys and usability studies. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that a lot of the different research methods that we use can be utilized in different ways at different points in the research sort of landscape. So, for example, a usability study could be used for exploratory research, but it could be just as effectively used for validation research by doing something like prototype testing or prototype usability studies, for example. So these are typical methods, but they're not the only ones, and the use cases can differ as well. Now, the cadence of something like exploratory research tends to be less frequent. So we're talking something like once or twice a year. Now, the specific cadence is going to depend on how quickly the business that you're working with or in, how quickly they can action the recommendations from exploratory user research. So, for example, if you're a really agile team and you can make changes really quickly and implement test ideas very quickly, and you have enough traffic to run tests relatively quickly, you might want to run some larger exploratory pieces of research more frequently. But typically, the types of clients that we work with, once or twice a year, we're looking at doing a larger exploratory piece of research. The typical use case for an exploratory piece of research is when you're kicking things off. So at the beginning of a new experimentation program. This is because exploratory research really helps you to understand the overall landscape of the user journey and the user experience, and really shine a light on the key areas of opportunity. Next up, we have focused research. Focused research is where we want to dig deeper into a specific topic, opportunity, or customer segment. Typical methods in this case could be things like card sorting or analytics analysis. Card sorting is a very specific research method that is particularly useful when gathering insight and data into the main navigation on a website. Typically, you wouldn't conduct card sorting when running exploratory research because it's quite a time-intensive type of research. And until you know there's a problem with the main navigation, which you could uncover through things like usability studies, session recording analysis, etc., it doesn't necessarily make sense to just do card sorting. So this is where we would look to focus in on a particular issue. Perhaps in the exploratory research, you identified that the main navigation seemed to be a barrier to conversion. So the logical next step would be to run some focused research on the topic of card sorting. Thinking about cadence with regards to focused research, we're thinking slightly more regularly. This is because they tend to be smaller research projects, more tailored to a specific use case, particular problem, or opportunity. So perhaps monthly or quarterly, again, depending on how quickly you can move and how many resources you have in your team as well. And then finally, we have validation research. So this is ultimately where we look to validate the effectiveness of a concept or a solution by gathering data. A/B testing is a form of validation research. Arguably, it is the most robust given the way that the data is collected, etc. But there are other methods that you can use to validate and gather data to support concepts and solutions as well. As well as A/B testing, we can think about things like copy testing, prototype testing, etc. This type of research would be going on a much more frequent basis, so monthly or weekly, again, depending on how quickly you can move. As you can see, A/B testing is referenced here as one of the methodologies. So you should almost be thinking of the other types of research in this objective going through a similar cadence as your A/B testing. So if you're running, maybe up to 5 A/B tests a month, you might want to be thinking about doing, up to 3 other validation techniques as well. And similarly, if you're running 10 experiments a month in terms of A/B tests, then you would be wanting to do more validation research as well. A typical use case for validation research is particularly when you can't A/B test something for any reason, whether that's traffic limitations, technical limitations, etc. Validation research can help you to bridge that gap between a robust A/B test and just complete guesswork, because you can still gather some data to support the decision that you're making. Here's an example of exploratory, focused, and validation research in practice. So for this client, we started by running an exploratory piece of research. This was our Research Excel methodology, which I will come to cover a little bit later. This identified that product findability and website navigation were a key barrier to conversion on this particular website. So one of the core recommendations that came out of that large piece of exploratory research was a focused piece of research that aimed to focus in on the main navigation. So in this case, we used card sorting research to help us to understand how users expected content to be grouped and labeled, because the current groups and labels were not meeting with their expectations. And we knew that through the exploratory research. The card sorting led us to come up with a new refined version of the website navigation, which we were then able to validate through tree testing, which is another form of validation research. In this particular case, we weren't able to A/B test through technical limitations, so tree testing provided us with the data required to feel confident in the decision of changing the main navigation on the website. So this is an example of how exploratory research can flow into focused research and then into validation research. Now, one final thing to say on this example makes it look like these three research methods always fit together perfectly, flowing from one into the other. This is not always the case, and that is completely okay. So what I mean by this is in some cases, you might not need to do focused research. The exploratory research might identify a clear issue for either a fix on the website or an experiment. And you can go ahead straight away and either do validation research or run an A/B test and skip that middle step altogether. In other cases, exploratory research will identify opportunities for JDIs or just do it, as we call them. In this case, you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to do focus research or validation research. It's enough to just implement that change on the website. So these things do not always happen in a kind of linear order. In other cases, you might go back and forth. And what I mean by this is you may do exploratory research, focused research, validation research, then you might do another round of validation research or go back to the drawing board with regards to design or solution creation. So it's okay if this is a little bit more of a mixed up process, but the important thing is that you are utilizing all of these different research methods on an ongoing basis within your experimentation program. That could look something a little bit like this. So this slide is an example of a 1-year experimentation roadmap. So you can see some of the references that I made earlier to the cadence of the different research methods here. So 2 large exploratory research projects that then lead into 3 or 4 different focused research areas, and then into kind of, a lot more validation pieces of research or A/B tests on an ongoing basis. Now, this is obviously just a visual, but again, this is just to represent how we can be utilizing all of these different research methods on an ongoing basis, and really how A/B testing should be seen as simply another form of validation research to help us to make more informed business decisions. Okay, so on to the third and final learning objective. Now we're going to talk about the different research objectives, the role of a mixed methods approach to user research, and how to combine all of the different research methods together to build a methodology for any use case or project. So there are kind of 3 main considerations that you need to be thinking about when planning user research. And when I talk about planning user research, I want you to again think back to the framework that I just shared about exploratory, focused, or validation research. So at any of those cases, what you're looking to do is to build an appropriate methodology for your given use case. So think back to the example I gave about card sorting. That's only relevant in certain circumstances. So what we are thinking about doing here is how to determine what is the most appropriate solution to any given kind of problem or research objective that you might have. So the 3 things to think about when doing this planning are the type of data, the strength of signal, and the resources, by which I mean time and money. So starting with the type of data. So we have 2 main types of data that we want to collect within any user research project. So that is qualitative, so what users say, and then quantitative, so what users do. An example of this is that the data that we get from quant research activities will tell us what is happening on the website. For example, it will tell us how many people are clicking on an element, how many people are looking at a particular page, and how many people are leaving the website from a particular stage in the journey. But what it won't tell us is why that is happening. So why are so many people leaving from the basket page, for example? And why are so many people clicking on this element that isn't actually clickable? This is where qual research comes in. This is where we can uncover the why. And it's only when we combine these 2 research methods together that we really start to understand the situation. And you'll remember earlier I talked about getting as close to the truth as possible. This speaks to that exact kind of reasoning as well, in the sense that we can know what's happening and we can create hypotheses around why, but the chances that we kind of hit the nail on the head and make the right assumptions, it is much less probable than if we just ask users ourselves. Now, the other thing to mention that you can reference on this slide is the concept of a mixed methods approach. So this is essentially exactly what I'm talking about. This is about combining research methods together to get us as close to the truth as possible. There are actually quite a few methods to a mixed methods approach. Ultimately, it increases the strength of signal. So what I mean by strength of signal is the confidence that we can have in the data. The more data sources that are speaking to or pointing to the same issue or opportunity, the higher the chance that that's a real issue or opportunity ultimately. Mixed methods approach also helps us to refine experiment concepts quickly. So we can utilize different research methods throughout the life cycle of an experiment to help us to put our best foot forward when it comes to the experiments that we run. So this might look like running user research on a prototype before we run an actual A/B test to gather qualitative feedback on, how that solution or concept actually landed with users. We can combine that data with the actual A/B test data to come up with a more robust takeaway and conclusion from the experiments that we're running. Mixed methods also helps us to increase the level of learning and understanding. Again, we can't hope to completely learn about our users through kind of just one usability study or one customer survey. This kind of deeper level of customer understanding comes via, continuous learning through a range of different data points. Cue a mixed methods approach. Mixed methods also helps us to overcome barriers to experimentation. I've alluded to this a couple of times already. So things like traffic limitations or technical limitations, or even time limitations that prevent us from running robust A/B tests. So we can utilize different research methods to help inform our decision making. So we've talked about the data type, qual and quant. We've talked about how we can increase the strength of signal and the importance of a mixed methods approach. So the final thing to talk about is resources, so time and money. This framework helps us to balance all of these different factors against each other to help us to identify the best user research method. So here you can kind of see I have low effort and high effort mapped out on the axis. And this is where I'm talking about resources ultimately. So this is, a simple yet important step. So if you had all the time and money in the world, then the research methodology that you may come up with for any given project or use case is likely to be different if you have constraints in one or the other or both of those two areas. So you need to think about how quickly do I need answers and ultimately what resources, and that includes, manpower as well as money for things like tools, user research incentives, recruitment of users for these different research methods. So this is a bit of a balancing act to make sure that you get the strongest strength of signal that you can with the constraints that you have when it comes to time and money. So this framework can be used to help you to kind of balance and see where the balance is between those different research methods with regards to strength of signal or value and effort, which is related to that resource topic as well. Now, the final framework I want to share with you as part of this lesson is our user research methods framework. So again, this starts to map out some of these different factors and considerations that I've just told you through. So it talks about the research objective. First of all, is it exploratory, focused, or validation research? I mentioned earlier that different research methods can be used in different ways to support all of those different research methodologies. So exploratory research, you could utilize usability studies, but you can also use usability studies for other types of research as well. So this framework starts to represent that with the sort of ticks that you can see in the first three columns. Then we have qual and quant, so the type of data that we're looking to collect. Now, one thing to mention, and we will go into more detail on this in the specific lessons, but there are research methods that kind of cross both qual and quant. An example of this might be a customer survey. The primary data type that you're going to get from a customer survey is qualitative. That said, it really depends on the types of questions that you're asking as to whether the focus is qual or quant. So, for example, if you're asking open-ended questions, then you're going to get more qualitative insight. Whereas if you're asking people to scale, their experiences or their perceptions of brands, then the data you're going to get is quantitative. You can also obviously mix these together and end up with a mixture of both qual and quant. So what we've mapped out on this framework is the primary data type, but that's not to say that there aren't opportunities to gather different types of data from these different research methods. In the final three columns, you can see time, budget, and strength of signal represented through the art of emoji. This, again, is somewhat open to nuance. It depends on things like which tool you're using and the scale of the research study that you're conducting. But again, this can help you to map out the most appropriate research methodology based on your requirements and your constraints with regards to things like time and money as well. So here I'm showing a few examples of focused research methodologies. The reason I want to share this with you is to kind of show how you can utilize all of these different frameworks and ways of thinking to come up with these focused research projects. So an example of this, like checkout, for example, you might identify in the exploratory research that there are some clear barriers and issues within the checkout. So we may then want to go away and run some focus research in the checkout. So things that would make sense would be things like form analytics, session recording analysis, and usability studies focused specifically in the checkout in particular. Another example is when we want to focus in more depth on a particular segment. So you see here vet and enterprise. So for this particular client, there was kind of a use case for this product for vets and also for enterprise level contracts as well. So we did run some focused research around those different customer segments. And you can kind of see, again, some of the different types of research that we used. The enterprise one is a good example here because you can see some of the research methods we used here were particularly detailed and time-intensive research methods. So things like customer interviews and diary studies, these types of things can take weeks, if not months, to conduct. But we really wanted to dig deep into this really high-value customer segment, which is the reason why we picked those research methods. Okay, that's nearly us done for this lesson. The final thing I want to share with you today is Spiro's Research Excel framework. Spiro's Research Excel framework is an exploratory piece of research, as I've alluded to earlier in terms of what that means. But you can kind of see here that we have, I think, 7 different research methodologies, and we are triangulating the insights and data from across those different research methods to really get to the heart and the truth of what the key barriers to conversion are for any given client. Now, our Research Excel methodology can actually be picked up and turned into a focused research methodology as well. So you could run Research Excel just on a specific area of the site or just with a specific segment of users, for example. But at its heart, the goal of Research Excel is an exploratory piece of research. I'm sharing this with you now because this is going to be the core of the rest of this course. We're going to go through each of these different research methods in detail in a different lesson each. And then, as I mentioned at the start, the final 3 lessons will really speak to that middle part of the Research Excel module, the insights section. How do we bring everything together? How do we identify the key themes across all these 7 different research methodologies? And how do we really turn Research Excel into a strategic roadmap for experimentation? The lesson assignment for this lesson is, imagine that you ran some exploratory research on the website that you work on currently. You identified that the checkout is a key barrier to conversion for users. The exploratory research identified some bug fixes and iterative A/B tests that your team is already working on. But you also want to dig deeper into this area of opportunity to understand what's really going on. So what I want you to do is to plan a focused research project for digging deeper into the checkout user experience. And I want you to think about combining between 3 and 5 research methods. Don't forget to utilize the frameworks that I've shared today to help you with this assignment. That brings us to the end of lesson 1. So to recap, we covered the definition of user research. So understanding user behaviors, needs, and motivations through a wide range of different research methodologies. We also talked about the fact that from an experimentation standpoint, this means using this research and insight to identify and inform experiment ideas. We talked about why user research even matters for experimentation and the fact that running user research as part of your experimentation program ultimately improves the quality of the output of your experimentation efforts. I shared with you the Explore, Focus, and Validate framework to help you to plan user research on an ongoing basis. We also talked about the importance of using a mixed methods approach and utilizing qual and quant research methods. And finally, we talked about the spectrum of different research methods that are out there and how to go from, say, 20 different research methods down to a research methodology that makes sense for your project in your use case. The main things we talked about were the type of data, the strength of signal, and also resources, so time and money.